Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Total Podcast with me, your host, Phil Scott. So today, my guest, my very special guest, she is a TV journalist, but she is so much more, and I can't wait to interview her today. Her name is Joya Dass. Joya, thank you so very much for doing the podcast today. I truly appreciate it. And good
Yeah,
morning and good afternoon for you because it's afternoon for you.
that's right. Good morning to you. It's Monday. It's always like birth trauma every morning when you wake up, you're like, "Oh, the weekend's already over."
Yeah, I've been up since 4:30 this morning, so it's my days are very long. So I appreciate you doing this. So first of all, Joya, I want you, if you would, I have some questions for you. So first of all, tell us about where you were born and where you went to school.
So I was born in Pennsylvania, and oftentimes when I'm in the back of a cab or I pull up to a gas station, the first question people ask me in airports, "Where are you from?" And I know the question they're actually asking, and I'll say Pennsylvania just to be a jerk. But I know that what they're really after is that my parents are from Calcutta and Burma, mother and father respectively.
Mhm.
There was a small clutch of Indians that were already settled in the central Pennsylvania region, and I think that was a reason for why they settled there, and that's where I was raised.
Right.
Middle class America. I was one of two Indian kids in the high school. But I don't know that I ever felt that my race was necessarily a differentiator. I think that culturally, how I was being raised was the big differentiator.
And in terms of going to school, did you notice any differences between the way students treated you? Because from my own experience, when I was a little munchkin in elementary school, um, they were mixing the schools and the district. I went to elementary school in Missouri. And so the kids, we didn't know any better. We just all got along. So was that your experience as well?
I would say that was my experience, but that's a complex answer. I'll never forget in being in grade school. I don't know what grade I was, but school had just let out, and a little girl yelled out from one of the buses, "Hey, Swahili!" And
Mm,
I wasn't old enough to know what that meant, but I knew it wasn't good. And I don't think that she knew what she was saying either. She probably heard it somewhere and thought it'd be cool to say. So I
mhm.
think that there are like pockets and moments where my otherness was called out. I think that when I got to high school, you know, there's cheerleading, there's Friday night football games, there's proms, there's all kinds of social things that are very American.
Right.
And my parents raising a daughter in America were so fearful of I don't know what that I wasn't allowed to go to the movies, to Friday night football games, to be in cheerleading, to go to prom, to be in choir. And so I think that being the product of immigrants that led with so much fear is where I felt the othering. And that had nothing to do with the other kids. I think they were more just wanting to figure out very generous ways to include me, and they did.
Mhm. Now, I didn't experience anything in terms of race until I moved to California when I was in the eighth grade. Race was never an issue in Missouri, but once I moved to Southern California, then that's when things started to go south a little bit. So I was called the N word at school. I mean, I was teased and harassed that first year. High school was okay, but that eighth grade year in junior high school was not pleasant. And I guess that's what got me into education. My eighth grade history teacher, she was fantastic. My counselor that year, those two ladies just inspired me. They got me through the school year, and that's what motivated me to get into education because they were so kind and polite and respectful that it just rubbed off on me. And so that's what got me into education. So it's interesting how different parts of the country you experience different things. I
But,
had not
all of that, regardless of where you are, is learned behavior.
right.
Somebody somewhere along the way normalized it to be calling somebody those things. Somebody normalized being pejorative, and kids aren't born being those people. They learn that from the adults around them. So I think 100% responsibility, and I'm sorry that you had to go through that.
Yeah, but I learned from it, and like I said, it inspired me to work with kids, and to this day, I mean, kids look at me as just Mr. Scott. They don't see me as my color. They just see me as Mr. Scott, and that's always been the goal. And so that's been awesome. So, what was what was it like for you in terms of going to college? What college did you go to, and how did you get into journalism?
Yeah, so college is a tough story for me because my parents picked where I was going.
Mm,
And I wanna share that I am a product of home of domestic violence. So I knew two things from a very young age, that I was gonna leave that home when I meaningfully could and never come back. And the second thing I knew since I was 4 is that I wanted to be a news anchor. So know that when I got to school and the registrar called me in second semester sophomore year to remind me that there was an outstanding bill due from last semester and an upcoming bill due from the coming semester that
mm,
remained unpaid, A, I wasn't surprised, but B, I was not going back home. And so I marched into the CFO's office of the college, which is a very wealthy school. This was a dumping ground for a lot of boarding school kids.
mhm,
This man was not used to having this brand of conversation. And I said, you and I are going to sit here and we are going to figure this out. My parents are no longer part of the conversation. And he was like, young lady, like you owe 16 to $18,000. Like, where are you going to come up with this? You have to go home. I said, I'm not going home. And I started to go to classes. And Bucknell, where I went to school, is a big fraternity and sorority school. So
mhm.
sorority rush had started, which meant a week long worth of parties where you are essentially selecting the candidates from the freshman class who are going to go on to become members of your club.
Right.
And so it was a week of those parties that ensued. And all of these letters just kept piling up and piling up and piling up on my dresser. And I was like, I'll just deal with them when rush is over. Now, mind you, right before rush had started, I had picked up a huge book of scholarships and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote. And I said, I want to become a news anchor. Will you help me? My parents don't have any money. And I wrote it over and over again. And like I said, then I just shelved it and went off to rush parties. Well, rush eventually came to an end, and I started sorting through all of those envelopes. And most of them read the same. They said that I owed money, no surprise. But I remember opening one envelope and it read differently.
Mm,
Again, I'm 18 years old. I'm already overwhelmed by all of this. I took that letter back into the CFO's office, and he was none the happier to see me. We'd been at it for weeks at this point. And I handed him this letter and I said, this letter reads different. And he read it, and it was the first time he smiled at me. And he said, you, young lady, are a very lucky girl. A doctor in the Midwest who is an alum has set aside a scholarship for aspiring journalists. He has agreed to fund half of your education. So, no, what are we going to do about the other half? So him and I sat together and we jerry-rigged a series of federal and state loans together. There was still a $2,000 overage, and I just dug my heels in. I said, you're going to write me an interest loan. You are going to put whatever interest rate on that, and I'm going to sign it, and I'm going to start paying it back the minute I graduate. But you have got to get me through this. And I think that he saw that I was so serious that he drafted up the letter. I signed it, and I got a bunch of little jobs on campus, and that is how I got through college. For years and years, I was so angry at my parents because they had blown the money on a Mercedes Benz the year before, which is why they didn't have it. They didn't
Wow.
have the best financial stewardship skills. And so for many years, I was very mad at them. But today, I realized that that was such an incredible gift because from that day forward, I knew exactly how much money was coming in and exactly how much money was going out. I had complete independence. They could never tell me what to do ever again. And I think that even today, I could tell you exactly down to the penny how much is in every single one of my bank accounts. And having that level of transparency into your finances was a total gift for me.
Wow. And it seems to me too, it followed you in your career because you did financial reporting. And so that, wow, what a base for you to do that. And full disclosure for me too, I also grew up in a home where my dad was an abusive, womanizing alcoholic. So I saw a lot and went through a lot of things as a child. And again, it's amazing how those moments in your life can propel you to do other things and inspire you to be different from your parents. So
Yeah. I mean, there are many years I wasn't proud of who I was. I was definitely rebelling. I think I was working out and undoing a lot of the conditioning. So
Mm,
sometimes I look back and I shudder at the person that I was, but I have worked a ton on myself. It sounds like you have as well. And that
yes,
is the responsibility. It's 100% responsibility at the end of the day. You have a choice once you leave that home or leave that dynamic.
right. I agree. Now, also, I wanted to ask you, what are some of your most memorable experiences working in journalism and in television in general? And how did they inspire you to start your careers outside of journalism? Because you've done some amazing things outside of journalism too.
So I went into business news because I really crave the intelligence that goes into explaining your money, the math, the science, the technology. Money is not something that's ever going to get skipped in a morning broadcast because it's such an important piece. And I love the intelligence around it. So I
Right.
think that I'll start with that. I think that the first time that I was told that I was going to be the regular reporter from the Nasdaq was a memorable moment for me because I had at that point, as keep in mind the story that I just told you about college. And then I paid for graduate school. And then I paid to move to Wyoming to get to my first on air station. And then I paid to come back to New York City. At that point, I already given up so much as a young woman that moment where I was finally anointed worthy of the thing that I had been working towards and wanting since I was 4 years old was a very big moment for me. And double that with the fact that I was doing what I wanted to do, which was business news. So I think that was a big moment. I remember being on the trading floor as a woman, one of the few women on the trading floor, and having to walk across that. And I don't know that I was afraid of it. I think it emboldened me in many ways and steeled me to be someone who could navigate New York in many, many ways. It's a tough place to kind of grow up. And I spent from 1999 to the better part of 2010, 2012, 2016, actually on that trading floor.
Wow.
So I think I have memories of that, and I have memories of it going from what you see on the movies with, people screaming and yelling, and there's just all these male bodies on the floor. And I was just there on Friday, and it's contracted so much. Computers are doing everything. You barely see any women on the floor still, but
Mm,
just seeing the evolution of that trading floor, I think sticks out for me. And then, of course, 9/11. Um,
yes.
I know that there were many people, including my mother and my best friend, who knew that I worked downtown, but didn't know exactly where I was in relation to the towers. And it was my first week at CNN. And so I hadn't been sent down. I was just getting credentialed and getting inducted and onboarded. And what a week to be onboarded because 9/11 had been
Right.
happening. And I remember being assigned a cameraman and being sent down to St. Vincent's Hospital, which is no more. But the Bank of Press stood on one side of 7th Avenue. The doctors all stood on the other side of 7th Avenue. And everybody just looked downtown waiting for the bodies to come in. And the
Mm,
bodies never came in because they'd been incinerated. But I just remember it being a very hot, unusually hot September. We had walked all the way from 34th Street down to 12th and 7th, and I don't think that you ever forget where you were standing on 9/11 when everything happened.
you're the first person that I've spoken to who was there when it happened. I mean, I've seen stories for years where I've heard about people sharing their experiences there, but you're the first person that I've actually spoken to that was there when it happened. Um, for me, I can remember one of the things that kind of stood out to me is you kind of take it for granted that planes are just flying over all the time and everything, but air traffic stopped. And it was so weird not to see airplanes flying over for what was it, like a week or so or something. It was just crazy not to see. I mean, you take it for granted that, oh, there's a plane flying over, but being here in Southern California, and I mean, I see it all the time because we're in the airspace where I live. You see planes all the time, but it was so weird not seeing airplanes flying over, and just the whole sentiment of the country was just so different that time. And so, wow, it's just amazing that stayed with you. All of that, it just stayed with you
I
over
think
the
that
years.
having led the life that I live and being in journalism, it hardens you to a lot of things, and not in a good way, right? It hardens you to a
Right.
lot of things that would probably scandalize most people. But I just remember not crying really for the majority of that day until I opened up the New York Times, and it was like the last texts that people had sent from the planes to their loved ones. And it still chokes me up today. Like, they were never going to see their kids, their wives, their, their parents again. And I think that moment is when I think it really bottled up and became a watershed moment for me.
Now tell me too, because you're doing so many other things now. How did that? I want to get to the fun facts about you later on because
Yeah.
they are absolutely awesome. But just now, just doing the things that you're doing, the other things outside of television now, because I know you fill in for Jane King sometimes, and that's how I got to know you. I'm seeing you
Okay.
on the morning news.
Yeah.
But how did doing those other things, doing just working on the doing the journalism and working on the floor, Wall Street down there, how did that get you
Transpire
to
into my business.
yes.
So I had a sort of a come to Jesus moment at the 10-year mark of my career. And I thought to myself, if I was dead today and I were to look back on my life, would I have a body of work that I would say I was proud of? And I didn't, because news is get up at 2:30, into work by 3:30, get it out, get it out, get it out. And you're never taking time to make anything really particularly beautiful. And
Right.
so when my contract came up with Channel 7 here in New York, I started a documentary production company. Now, it was very hard for anybody to see me as a director or producer because I was a talking head. And so I was like, fine, I'm not someone who's easily stymied. I'm just going to start my own production company, do my own fundraising, create my first film, shoot it, direct it, bring it to market. And then I'm going to, prove that I have the ability to do this as well. So I had taken on a business partner because I was still on the air. Her name was Greta. And Greta had started something called Lady Drinks in Toronto. And it was a monthly meetup for women to come together in film and TV to network and get jobs. So she had moved to New York. We formed our documentary production company. And as a pure business development exercise, she said, could we host Lady Drinks meetups in New York? This is July of 2012. And I said, sure. So I remember we picked a bar, we sent out the flares. And first it was 8 women. Then there was 40 women. Then there was 300 women. And I'm saying consistently 300 women. And I was totally overwhelmed. And this is an important detail to point out. Greta was English. And all of the women that were showing up were Indian. And what I had not realized is that over those 10 years, a whole generation of Indian girl had grown up watching me on TV, men too, at a time that there were no Indian women on mainstream television. So all of a sudden they're seeing someone that looks like them, that doesn't speak with an accent, that is doing something that's not doctor, lawyer, engineer, because that's what most Indian parents want you to be. And so they were now coming to share that they were doing something other than the Indian parent approved doctor, lawyer, engineer. And it was honestly the first time I'd been taken down behind the TV screen and made accessible. So that was when I realized that I was in a place of responsibility, like it or not. So I moved the dynamic of interviewing CEOs from the floor of the stock exchange in front of this audience that was very hungry to learn about business, and started hosting monthly events. And that is what gave birth to my business that I have today. So when people ask me, oh, do you miss journalism? I mean, I don't miss journalism. I'm just doing journalism on my own terms now. I'm still using my gifts to be able to be very curious and asking very smart people some very smart things around business, but I'm doing it for the benefit of a live audience that is impacted far more greatly by listening to this. So that was 12 years ago. I've had my business now for quite some time. And I have changed the business model quite a bit since then. But I'm still using my gifts to help women tell better stories about themselves.
Yes, and that leads me into my next question about your public speaking and coaching, the Women's Leadership Lab.
Leadership Lab.
Yes. And
yeah.
I just want to say really quickly, a couple of things. When I was reading about you, to me, you're like and I've described this actress that I've interviewed in this way too, but you're like a Swiss Army knife of just work and careers, and just you're able to do different things. There's that. And two, just interviewing you and talking to you and just hearing your background, you're a fierce woman, and I love that. So go ahead,
Thank
Joya.
you.
You're welcome.
I think it's from being a survivor for so many years. I think that there's plenty of people who would have been standing at that crossroads in college, being faced with this enormous bill, packed it in and just gone home. And that wasn't even an option for me. That wasn't even a consideration for me. I always say this, it's a little obnoxious, but in Joya, I trust. And so I was going to figure out a way. And I think that that's what makes me so fearless about so many things that I have done, will do, have yet to do, because I welcome the challenge. And again, going back to that moment at the 10-year mark, if I died today, I would be dying a very happy person, because I've completely lived life to the fullest every single day.
Wow. Now tell me a little bit more about the leadership club and
Yeah.
leadership lab, excuse me, and just
Yeah.
how that has affected you and inspired you, and just what a gift it's been to work with other women and to help them along in their careers.
Well, as I said, my business was originally called Lady Drinks, and that's what was registered with the IRS. But as I started to charge higher and have higher profile women coming through, Lady Drinks just wasn't doing justice to the gravitas of the programming I was doing. If someone's company was underwriting this, it would immediately get flagged at HR, because someone was like, what am I just writing a check for? So I had to change the business structure from a nonprofit to a for-profit. And then I also changed the name at that point, because I felt that it needed to be reflective of the gravitas of what I was doing. So that's why it's the Women's Leadership Lab today and not Lady Drinks. The second point is that I realized, after trying many different formats, doing a retreat, doing a 6-week public speaking class, doing a 10-week workshop, and then putting women on stage, after trying many different sort of modalities of training, I've arrived at what I have today, which is a 12-month mastermind. And that mastermind works on 3 things. It's your mindset. It works on your personal brand. And then ultimately, in the culmination or graduation from that 12 months, is you giving a TED Talk on a New York City stage in front of your friends, your family, your CEOs, and all of your stakeholders in your life. I felt like if I didn't have something that was publicly witnessed, you could be like, yeah, I worked with Joya for a year. I worked on a brand, but there's no getting out of this when there's this much public accountability.
Right.
So that is the main sort of offering that sits at the heart of my business today. It's $27,000 this year. It goes up to $32,000 next year. That asset is filmed. You walk away with that, and then you're able to put that on whatever digital real estate you have. Now, if someone can't give me 12 months, which is fair, some of my C-level women can't do that, I do work with them one-on-one. However, my gimmick is that I'm not going to just put you in a boardroom here in New York. I could. That's an option that's available to you. But I will take you to Paris. I will take you to Tuscany. I will take you to Lisbon. You pick whatever city, and I'm going to fashion an entire cultural immersive around our strategy sprints as I help you to draft that TED Talk, draft your legacy, lay ground for that promotion. So I think that that's my unique differentiator in the marketplace. Yes, I'm teaching you to do better public speaking, but I'm going to do it in a really exciting place. And this still goes back, this harkens back to me shooting that first film back in 2010. I saw how the crew of 5 guys that I took to India to shoot that film came back completely different people. They were indelibly changed. They were not the same men who returned to JFK as the ones that left 8 weeks before. I think when you put yourself in big spaces, you're going to just have different thoughts. And so there's a method to my madness as to why I'm such a rabid fan of taking women and taking them out of their comfort zone.
Now, to me, and I mentioned this a little earlier, you are a strong, intelligent, inspiring woman. What do you attribute your energy and passion for life for? And you've kind of touched on it a little bit, actually.
I wish that I had some big, deep answer, but I've just always had vision since I was a little kid. And to describe what that means, like my bedroom was like a museum. Like I didn't just have Barbies. I had Barbies that were placed on my walls very strategically, like it was a museum. And I took like jewelry boxes and pinned them at strategic points on my wall so they were equally spaced out. So I've always had like
Wow.
vision and very clear, specific vision about things I wanted to do. And I think that thing that sits inside of me has always informed the move and the next move and the next move and the move after that. And I wish that there was a bigger answer to that, but that's really it.
Now, I want to talk about some of the fun facts about you. So I'm going to jump to that because it's awesome. It's completely awesome. So, okay. So one of them is that you did stand up comedy. So you did stand up. Like, wow. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So, at this point, my business is booming. I mean, everyone kind of knows it's the bigger brand beyond what I've done on TV. And this woman that was helping me with the promotion of my film, to be honest, like we were doing screenings and she was really supporting a lot of the screenings that I was hosting in New York City. And she concurrently was also helping another South Asian comedian who was headlining at Caroline's. And his business model was such that every other person in his lineup of professional comedians was going to be a first timer. And if you really think about it, this guy was a former McKinsey guy. It was a genius thing because of course people were going to say yes and bring like 20 of their idiot friends to see them make a total ass out of themselves on stage, right? Like he knew he was going to sell out the venue, and he did by having this business model. But they were down to the last of the lineup and they still had to cast one more person or two more people. And because she was working on my project and her project, she had the benefit of hearing Joya online, like the one that you hear on TV. And then she had the benefit of hearing Joya offline, and so I have my friend voice and my friend personality that comes out when I'm not on TV. And she overheard that.
Wow.
And so she's like, Joya, I think that you should do stand up. And I said, no, 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 no. Like, that is not my brand. I'm a serious business journalist. No, no, no. She's like, oh, but I've heard you offline and you can do this. And so I did. And I used at that point, I don't know, 11 years of dating annals and anecdotes that I had been stowing away and regaling my friends with and had them in stitches over. And I used that as my 11-minute set on stage. And I remember afterwards, people were like, so when are you going to do that again? I'm like, again, this is like not the new trajectory of Joya's career. I only did this because it was like a charity thing and they asked me to. But it was a learning moment for me because I think that the other real Joya could stand to come out to play a lot more in the other spaces I occupy. And I don't know that I let her out so much.
You love bourbon. You love smoking cigars. Tell us about that.
No, so keep in mind, I started my career on Wall Street and I didn't want to be just a one note person when I was out networking or talking to people and making small talk on the trading floor. And who was I surrounded with? All guys. And so I took myself to a Glenlivet Scotch tasting where a guy in a kilt and a map of Scotland described why there are the 5 regions of Scotland, why the terroir and the water impacts the taste of the Scotch from that region. And I became very savvy in what Scotch is and the really like esoteric Scotches. My now partner is a big bourbon drinker, which is how bourbon sort of came into my life. But I just naturally was very curious about Scotch, and that kind of led down to the path of smoking cigars. And I really love cigars. Honestly, it was just because I wanted to have other handles to be able to talk to people around me that were largely men. And I don't think that they expected to hear a 5'1" Indian girl start to rattle off scotches that weren't commercially available and cigars that she loved. I don't still think people expect that from me.
What was it like for you talking about the Bollywood films and that kind of thing? What was that experience like for you?
So again, I was at CNN, and that's a very big place, and I was a cub little reporter, but my ambition is very hard to contain, and I wanted something that was just purely going to be mine. I had grown up in an Indian household. One of the things that we did as a family every night was to watch a Bollywood film. They would come on these big VHS tapes, and we would, watch a portion of it, and that's how we sort of gathered in the evenings. And so I had a very healthy appreciation for Bollywood film. And so when I arrived in New York on Saturday mornings, there was this show that had a pretty great production quality. And it was essentially Access Hollywood, but summating all of the upcoming releases from the Bollywood industry. So I asked a friend of mine, I said, "Hey, do you know who the person is that produces this show?" And he's like, "Yeah, actually, he's a good friend of mine." I'm like, "Give me his email. I'm going to write him." And I wrote him. And he was like, "Why would you want to come host my show?" He's like, "You're already on CNN." I said, "Yeah, but what's happening right now is I was 30 years old. I had just taken my first trip to India as an American kid because I wanted to reframe what it meant for me to be Indian. I didn't want the version that my parents had shoved down my throat. So I was undergoing a period of rediscovery of self. I was undergoing a bit of a renaissance, and I wanted something that was mine. And so that's what provoked me to reach out to him, and I went in for a screen test, and I became the anchor for the next 15 years of this Saturday morning show called ABS. But I will tell you that it wasn't the fame that drove me. It wasn't the show that drove me. It was the fact that I got to write everything that I said. And I really enjoyed that exercise of writing that copy, because so much of what I did on CNN and all the other networks was so business news, right? It's cut and dry. There's very little creativity around that. But here I got to be very creative with the writing, and then to boot, I got to deliver it. So for me, that was the sheer joy in doing that show for the 15 years that I did.
Well, I'll tell you something that I've enjoyed just reading your entries on LinkedIn is your writing ability, because you're able to express yourself just in such a expert, clear, concise manner. I mean, I just totally enjoy reading what you have to say, and I know other people who read it enjoy that too. And if there's anything I loved, it's someone who can write and just get their feelings and their emotions across in a clear manner, and that's what you're able to do.
That's been a deal breaker for me. I think that's another reason why I went into business news, is because you can't really write for that. The market's moving so fast. You've got to be able to just write and talk. And so for me, writing is like oxygen. It has been since I was a kid, and I couldn't imagine a life without it.
Mm-hmm. Now, I wanted to ask you too about AI, and especially in media and how it seems to be changing anything. What is your view on how it's changing things, and where do you see it going?
So I have two responses to that. I look at people in TV around me, and I see that they only know how to do TV. They only know how to talk about TV. They only know how to be in TV. And I didn't want to be one of those people. I needed to always be relevant, and I needed to be evolving, and I always needed to be learning. So I think that was part of the reason why I started to self-educate on AI. That being said, so much of my writing today is aided by AI. So much of what I'm teaching my members of my mastermind and building their personal brand is by prompting ChatGPT to learn your prompt personality and then start to create content that can essentially, do the research for you in 30 seconds. You would have to go to a library as a kid and like go thumb through 50 different encyclopedias to arrive at what ChatGPT can spin out in under 20 seconds today. So how can you use all of those tools to be additive to your brand and additive to your writing? So it really behooves me to bone up on the way that people are leveraging ChatGPT in order to be able to, produce content and produce it faster, because ultimately some people don't love writing in the way I do. They want to get to the client. They want to do the lead generation and be done with it so they can actually be in front of the person that's going to cut them a check. And so if that's the case, then how can we leverage tools like ChatGPT to be able to help you do that?
Right.
The other piece that I find interesting about AI is that there's a lot of people that can't afford to work with me, for example. It's expensive, but there are so many tools that you can leverage today to be able to make your writing, to make your public speaking better. And so for those that can't afford to pay me, I'm making it my my duty to figure out what all the other tools are. So for example, there's a tool called Udly. I could integrate that with, this Zoom call that we're on right now. And in real time, it could be telling me to slow down, Joya, you're talking too fast, or, speak in simpler words. There's a real-time integration that's giving me feedback on how to be better, as opposed to waiting for me to get in front of a coach and get feedback in that way. So I think I really love that there's a way for people to access public speaking coaching to be better if they cannot afford to work with me. Now, that being said, this morning I worked with a client who has paid, market fare to work with me, but I'm asking him to now start practicing his storytelling. Where's that repository of his videos going to go? It's going to go into this Udly interface where he can actually put it in there and get real-time feedback on his pacing, on his filler words, on the clarity of his speech. And he doesn't have to wait for me, although I can still go into that same interface and assess, how great he's doing with the storytelling till we meet.
Now, one other thing I wanted to ask you about too is your love of travel. Tell us about some of the places that you've been, some of the other places that you just really stood out to you, and why travel means so much to you.
Travel means so much to me because I was not allowed to do so many things as a kid. Like I said, I couldn't go for ice cream with my friends. I couldn't go to the movies. I couldn't go to prom. I couldn't go to football games. And I think that once I left my home, the pendulum swung completely the opposite direction. I want to do everything. I want to try everything. I want to go everywhere, and, stop me if you can. So I have been very lucky that now I've done some inner work and realized that my top two core values are adventure and beauty. I learned that in a business mastermind during the pandemic. And so I've now built my business around that top value. But to answer your question, when I think about places that I go and have gone again and again, because there's something so magical about the ions in the air. I really loved Croatia. Not Croatia by land, but Croatia by sea. I'd done a boat charter, and 30 members of my Women's Leadership Lab and their families and their children and spouses and nannies had all come along for that trip. I love Croatia so much. And I love being out on the water so much. I think that that's the only time that I feel truly detached. As long as I have a Wi-Fi connection, I'm still logged in and still connected. So being truly detached when you're out to sea is a foreign feeling, and I love that. I also love that being that close to nature, because that's also something that's hard to access from here in New York. Turkey. Turkey is not a place that a lot of Americans are prone to go. And we went this past August, and I don't know that I realized how viscerally that country was going to impact me. I truly actually hated Istanbul. And it wasn't until we got on the boat in the south of the country that I felt like my parasympathetic nervous system actually calmed down. But the people were just so loving and so kind. And I cried. Like Turkey was just so touching and beautiful in so many ways that I didn't expect. India, I mean, India is multi-layered, so complex. You can go to the north and experience something totally different than what you're going to experience in the south. And I was so happy between the ages of 31 and 38, I went every year, and I just truly traveled because I wanted to understand what makes me me, but also to understand India. So I think that if you can have I say you have a love-hate relationship with India. There's reasons to hate it and there's reasons to love it. So I think that India will always have, like, an indelible mark on me. I am Indian, but I think I associate with being American far more.
Also, I wanted to ask you, in terms of your life and your career as a whole, where do you see yourself 5 years from now?
5 years from now, I'm really hoping that I've written my book. I've been sitting on it for far too long. The book proposal's been sitting on the shelf forever. I do hope that that book finally sees the light of day. I want to be globally recognized for my public speaking work. I write this every single night. Like, I don't want to just be working with Americans. I think that we increasingly live in a very global economy. We live in a global world, and I would love to be working with clients in Dubai and Vietnam and India and all over the place. And I'm working in that direction. For the first time, I have a woman in my mastermind who is based in London. I just did some work with some women who are in Ireland. So I'm chipping away at that marble. But I want to be globally recognized and flown around the world to give talks around, sort of my raw and honest storytelling methodology, and have written that book finally.
What for you? What is the most difficult thing about trying to write the book? Because I know when I've written a children's book manuscript, and I've been sitting on it for a while, so it's done, um, but I've not published it yet. But for you, what's the most challenging thing for you about getting everything down your on the way you want to say it?
Gosh, I mean, my brain has been trained to speed read. My brain has been trained to write in short, choppy sentences that are digestible for broadcast. Even on LinkedIn, you have to write in a very short, concise way
Yes.
and with line breaks to make it digestible, because everybody's absorbing everything on mobile. So the muscle flex of having to write long form, and also to just go back and confront all these pieces of my life. It's emotionally very heavy, but it's just a different muscle flex altogether. And I probably just need the accountability of a writer to help me pull all of that out onto the page.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, Joya, man, this has been such an honor, such a pleasure to talk to you in person and to have you on the podcast. Like I said, you're one fierce woman, you're inspiring, and I've learned some things from you just in our time talking. And what can I say? This has just been amazing. Joya, thank you so very much for doing the podcast today. I truly appreciate it, and it has been my honor to have you on.
Thank you, Phil. I appreciate the time. This is a great sort of reminder and a walk down memory lane to remember how far I've come, because I think it's very easy to beat yourself up and feeling like, oh gosh, I didn't get everything done on my to-do list today. But think about all that you've accomplished in a lifetime. It's a good reminder.
And also, it's to me, it's inspiring to talk to you too, because you make people feel like they can do so much more. They're
Yeah.
not just stuck into doing one thing. They can do and accomplish so much more if they put their minds to it and just
Yeah.
stick with it. And I
Yeah.
think you have a tenacity about you. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So with that, everyone, that is the end of this episode of the Total Podcast with me, your host, Phil Scott. Everyone stay safe, be careful out there, take care of one another, and we will talk again soon.